This video is a teardown and screen replacement of a Note 4. It'll also include the charge port replacement and really basically all parts of the phone itself. So you can see that this phone definitely has a shattered screen. So some tools we're going to use to help open this up is a couple pry tools. I like to use guitar picks, a nylon spudger to pull off any ribbon cables on the inside, a small Phillips screwdriver, and just in case a dental pick to get us under some sticky boards or something else. We also will need a heat gun. Alright, the first step to go ahead and disassemble this phone is to pull the back cover off. And we can go ahead and pop the battery out. You want to make sure that you remove all other pieces out of the interior of the phone, your S Pen, if you have any things still attached, an SD card or a SIM card, anything like that needs to come out. There are many screws on the back of this phone. There's actually 16. We're going to go ahead and take all of them out. So every single one of them has to go. And this will take a few seconds to get all of these out. Now honestly, as you remove these, you don't have to keep them memorized and where they came out of the phone. These are all exactly the same size. The one thing that I would make sure that you do is actually remove these out of the plastic housing on the back of the device. We will be giving some pressure to this to pull it off, and if you don't remove them before doing so, they can pop out, fly around, and you could lose the screw, and it's kind of a pain to kind of rummage around on the floor to try to find it. If that does happen, I suggest a magnet. That does make it a little bit easier to find them if you lose them on carpet or any other surface. We got about half of them out, just a few more to go. The reason why we want to take all these screws out is we'll be pulling this plastic frame off the phone itself. There's basically two ways to disassemble this phone. You can basically take the screen off before you take the mid-frame out of this housing portion, or you can kind of push the housing off of the mid-frame with the screen still attached, which I find to be the easier method when it comes to removing the screen itself, especially when it's this shattered. It's not as big of a concern that we might damage the screen. So that's the method that I'll be using to disassemble this particular device. You can see that this screw is stuck here, and when I was talking about I don't want to leave this screw attached because it'll fly out when we try to pull the housing off of it. So what we'll do is just pry it out with a pair of tweezers or a dental pick. We really want to get that out of there so we don't lose it. There we go. Set all those screws in a safe place. Now the next step for us is to basically go ahead and heat the front side up. There's basically some adhesive. It's underneath the screen. It's all around the edges. There's some on the back side of the LCD, but if we're going to be removing the housing itself rather than the screen, we're just going to heat the edges up so we can go ahead and just kind of pop it out and pry it out. Now we don't have to have it scorching hot. We just want it nice and warm. If you have a functional display, meaning that it still works, you will not want to heat this higher than maybe 175 degrees. Basically after that you can start to melt the glue that holds the glass to the actual AMOLED display on this. So just be careful with it. Let's get it nice and warm. Normally if you're trying to do the particular method I'm using, it won't be too big of a concern. Now we're going to take our opening tool. We're going to run it around the frame of this phone as much as we can. The goal is to basically cut the adhesive off of the frame and the screen. And doing so is kind of separate. Now, to get this housing to kind of separate, you want to push down on the back of this battery portion here. You can use your pry tool to get underneath the housing and wiggle it a little bit. The black battery portion is part of the mid-frame, so you can see me pushing it. You can see the frame start to pop out. You can use your pry tool to help cut the adhesive if you need to. Now, to be honest with you, if this frame or this glass is in one piece, it does make this a little bit easier. Now you have to give it a lot of pressure down here at the bottom because the charge port, which I just pointed to, actually has to pop out of the mid frame, and that's kind of what holds this piece together. Now I'm trying to cut the adhesive under this broken screen here. It's still trying to hold on as I try to pry this apart. You do have to give it a pretty decent amount of force to get it to give. You can see right there it popped out. The charge port has been removed. Take my spudger and kind of push it around the screen. See, I'm pulling it out. Now the one thing that's nice about this method is you don't have to worry about damaging your screen too much, as the midframe supports it as you push on it. Now, it'll normally pop off in one piece, but see how damaged this is up here at the top. So this glass is having a hard time letting go of the adhesive up here. So I'm just kind of cutting it and pulling it apart. Perfect. And that'll give us our look into our logic board. So on the housing itself, the white housing we just took off, you can see that there's still a few pieces that are attached here. The things that are attached to the housing are going to be your loudspeaker, as well as your 3.5mm headphone jack. Your power button and your volume buttons are still attached here as well. Now, if you were looking to replace your 3.5mm headphone jack, something's happened to it, it's not a difficult process to replace that. Basically, what you need to do is take a pry tool, put it underneath the logic board portion first, I'd say right here. Pull this up, and then basically just pull the headphone jack out and put your new one in. The loudspeaker, to be honest with you, I've never removed this before, and I find it really tricky to get out. So I've messed with it for a few seconds in the past, and it doesn't really seem like it wants to come out. So if you have a method on that, you'd like to share it with me, I'd like to hear it. You can see that it feels like it's almost glued in a lot of places. Although I haven't spent a lot of time looking into it, I've never had one that didn't actually function. So if you're looking to replace those, it's an easier fix. Go ahead and set that aside. We're going to go ahead and start to disassemble this phone. So you can see that our screen, a piece, and the housing has now been separated. What we'll need to do is remove a few things here. The screen itself is starting to separate away from the glass. You can see that we have our charge port there. So what we'll need to do is take out the logic board, and then we'll take out the charge port next. Now to do that, there's a couple screws that are attaching it. Well, we need to remove those before we remove any of the boards themselves. These screws are different from the ones we took off the back. There's one here and one here. They're both black. Make sure you keep these separate from the rest. They're really hard to confuse since they're completely different colors. But we'll need to put these back in when we reassemble the phone. Alright, so both of those screws have been removed. We're going to go ahead and pop up these two wire connectors here that are attaching the charge port to the logic board. Let's kind of pull them away. We have a ribbon cable here for the home button, which we'll go ahead and remove. We have one here for the earpiece speaker. Take a look at wiggling this around a little bit and see how it's attached. Let's take our nylon pry tool and just basically put it underneath and just gently wiggle it to start to free the board away from the midframe. Doing so will start to pop it up. The thing that kind of holds it down is the camera in its kind of housing area. You can see that the volume button's actually connected by contacts onto the midframe, so we're not concerned about damaging those. Same thing with the vibration module and the power button. So now the logic board's basically free. We're just going to gently pull it up. Sometimes it'll try to snag on a cable here. So just be a little bit gentle with it. The front-facing camera normally holds up in the upper right-hand corner here. So we're just going to pull this out of its slot. And that'll free the board so we can tip it backwards. Now, don't try to pull it right off. The charge port is connected down here at the bottom of the logic board. So you can see that we have our connectors here for the screen as well. So you'll feel those pop off as you remove the board. Now we've done the connector for the charge port. Now if you were actually doing the screen side first rather than the housing, which is what I just did to remove the screen, you would need to basically stop removing the screen right where these connectors are at. Now we're going to pull this charge port off a little bit. Let's get it nice and loose. Now we can't remove it completely because it wraps around onto the front underneath the screen. It's going to be your back button and your applications button on the phone itself. So you can't take that off. To actually replace your charge port, you do have to remove the screen, which is going to be our next step. Now to do this, to remove the screen, what we're going to do is basically take our heat gun and heat up all around the sides and the corners of it. Now there is also some adhesive in the middle of the screen as well. So we'll heat the middle up. I'm going to use playing cards for this. I find it usually fairly easy to disassemble the screens with playing cards. So we're going to use this to cut the adhesive off. Take our heat gun and we're going to heat up the edges mostly. That's where the majority of the adhesive is at, the really sticky stuff. Just kind of work our way around. You don't want to stick it down too far in one spot. But basically what we're going to do is heat it up and then push the cards through and disassemble the screen from the mid frame. So right here is where the adhesive in the middle of the phone is. So just go around the edges. We don't want to keep it in the same place too long, especially if your LCD is functional. That'll create a burn or a yellowing. So just move it around a little bit. If you have one, you can use an infrared thermometer if your screen's functional and you're trying to replace a different option or the charge port on this particular phone. Don't get it above about 180 degrees Fahrenheit. I'd keep it pretty well under that, honestly, about 170. You don't want to create any separation between the glass and the LCD with the local that's holding it in place. You can see I'm just moving it around in a circle, getting it nice and warm, which it is. Nice and warm to the touch. We'll take our playing card here, start down here at the bottom, and stick it in. Now you want to be very careful as you're doing this. Where the application button and the back button are, there's actually a ribbon cable there that connects to the charge port. You don't want to separate that if you're just trying to remove the screen. You want to keep that intact. So it can be a little bit tricky. That's why I usually start down the middle of it first. Get a little bit of separation. Now there's a couple different parts to this particular screen. So I'm going to take my time as I get down here towards the bottom. There is the S Pen mat, which is right behind it, the kind of the copper shielding. There is the display itself and the glass. So you want to try to get underneath all of them. So I'm going to use my spudger and just kind of wiggle it back and forth a little bit here. Get us a better picture of where we're at. It's not very warm down here, so what we're going to do is heat it back up towards the buttons before I try to remove the screen off of that place. If you get it nice and warm, not scalding hot, but nice and warm, it's usually much easier to not damage these cables down here. So again, it's taking our nylon spudger and wiggling it back and forth here, trying to figure out exactly where our button's at so we don't damage it. Well, now we'll take our playing card and push it underneath the glass. You can kind of use a cutting motion almost with it to help you pry it up. We'll then lay it flat to go around the adhesive around the home button. The same thing on the opposite side. Another good way to make sure you don't damage the button very well is make sure that when you push the playing card, you push it over the cable that wraps around the bottom of the screen. Doing that will normally put you right on top of the button rather than underneath it or through the middle of it. So start down the side and work our way towards the bottom. Do everything we can to stay on top of the screen and not onto the button itself. some separation there. We'll take our spudger and just push it in a little bit. You can see we got our cracked fragments here, and that's fine, so we'll try to separate between that. The one nice thing that's comparable from the Note 4 to the others is that the home button, or sorry, the buttons for the application button and the back button, they don't have adhesive on them, so they don't really stick to the screen itself like in the past phones like your S3 or S4. That was always kind of a pain, so it's kind of nice. So we got the adhesive down the side off, but now right in the middle of the phone is where it's sticking. So using our playing card in kind of a cutting motion, going back and forth on this. You can at this point get a little bit warmer if you need to. So here you go, you can see the copper shield down there. When I separate it, use my spudger underneath to kind of push on the glue a little bit in the trickier spots. Heat it up again. Now you also want to be careful of one more ribbon cable that's in here. Your home button cable runs down the interior portion right beneath the screen in the mid frame. It's normally really well adhered to the mid frame and don't have any problem with it, but if you're trying to push against the mid frame, just be careful. It's basically in the middle, slightly to the right behind the screen. Start with another playing card on the opposite side here. Alright, it's pushing it in towards the middle. Now, if you're doing this before removing the mid frame, what you'd want to do at this point, since you've got, looks like the majority of the middle frame adhesive has been removed, right as you get about this point on the screen, you're going to want to get the top portion on the side right here nice and warm, and then you can usually fold it open like a book. You can see how my playing card just went right underneath. These ribbon cables here, you don't want to catch these or harm these. And once you get the screen warm, you can open it and then detach these with a nylon spudger. If you're looking to do this, just the screen rather than the mid-frame replacement, I would suggest watching the reassembly video on this particular phone, and I'll show you basically the opposite of the way that I removed it, of putting it back together. So you can see right here in the middle I missed some adhesive which is holding us together. Now you can see it's opening like I was talking about if it was nice and warm. Perfect. So now we can go ahead and separate it. You can see that the silver kind of M shape here in the middle is adhesive. There's our buttons that we were just talking about. And then you can see the home button ribbon cable running up kind of middle to the right. Alright, now our next step is we want to go ahead and remove all of the glass fragments that are still attached to this. We're going to go ahead and remove this piece off of the button here. Then we can remove that from the phone. We'll go ahead and take the whole charge port off. And the home button. So take our spudger, since it's nice and warm still, and just kind of wiggle it a little bit so we can't get it to pop right off for us. You want to be careful here. You don't want to damage the button itself. And there's two ways of this. You can either try to pull it off or just use the ribbon cable to give you a little bit more leverage when you look to pull this. There's one button off for us. The other button's being a little bit trickier. So we'll try to put our spudger just underneath and get a little bit more leverage in pulling it. Being a little bit more difficult here. Let's try to pry it up with a little bit more leverage from our dental pick. It's working it nice and slow so I don't damage it. There we go. You can see they have these little silver pads underneath. You want to make sure that you don't separate or leave those on the midframe. So there's our charge port removed. So they definitely didn't make it easy for the charge port. You also want to make sure you keep this little speaker grill here when you're replacing your screen. Go ahead and set that aside. And then we're just going to go ahead and clean this up nice and clean as much as possible. Go ahead and push our ribbon cable for a home button through. So if you are looking to replace your home button, it's cracked, this would be the method to do it as well. You wouldn't have to remove the logic board or really the charge port cable if you're looking to do that. Perfect. We can go ahead and set that aside as well. That right there is a Note 4 disassembly. Now, if you're looking to also replace your volume buttons, basically you just need to pry this cable up right here and underneath the contacts and then pull the volume button off. Same thing goes for this side of the device. Basically, use your dental pick to pry underneath it. Any sharp tool will work. The vibration module usually has a pretty decent amount of adhesive on it. So if you're looking to replace your power button and the vibration module cable is all one piece, normally the best way to pry up right here in this open spot underneath the vibration module, it'll pop right up, and then you can basically pull the cable out, and that'll replace that cable as well. That is the disassembly. If you found it helpful, go ahead and hit the like button. If you have any questions about this, go ahead and throw them in the comments. I'll do my best to answer and respond to those. As always, I appreciate you watching. If you want to watch a reassembly video, I'll throw it down in the description, and I'll catch you on the next video.